I still remember the moment my heart stopped. It was a Tuesday morning, clear and calm, when I logged into my bank account, expecting to see the same steady balance I'd kept for years. Instead, the numbers stared back at me like a cruel joke. $0. 00. $30,000 gone. Every penny I'd saved for the last few years, carefully tucked away for repairs on the house, for medical bills I knew were coming, for the little cushion a man my age needs, vanished. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Banks do make them. But when I called the branch, the answer I got cut me deeper than any blade. "Sir," the young teller's voice was flat. "The transfer was made this morning. From your account to an external account belonging to—" She hesitated. "Ethan Hayes. My grandson. My own flesh and blood." I felt the phone slide in my palm. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike. The boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged. The boy I'd driven to baseball practice after long shifts at the plant. He had emptied me out. I tried calling him, of course. 3 times. No answer. On the 4th, he finally picked up, and his voice wasn't the voice of a boy anymore. It was cold, sharp, like he'd been rehearsing for this moment. "Grandpa," he said, "don't bother calling the bank. Don't bother going to the police either. If you do, I'll tell the whole town about what you did with that money before. I'll tell them you've been hiding things. You want that?" He was blackmailing me. My own grandson. The rage boiled up inside me, but I forced myself to keep steady. "Ethan," I said slowly, "you took my money. You'll give it back." He laughed. "No, Grandpa. Not this time. You've always had control. Now it's my turn. Think of it as an inheritance, just early." The line went dead. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the peeling linoleum floor, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Betrayal has a sound, you know. It's the click of a phone hanging up when you realize the person you loved most has turned against you. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, lights off, replaying his words over and over. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, a thought came to me as clear as day. If Ethan wanted to play this game, he didn't know who he was dealing with. Because I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. By the next morning, the anger had hardened into something sharper. I wasn't pacing the floor anymore. I wasn't wringing my hands like some helpless old man. No, I was calm, cold, focused. Ethan thought he'd stolen $30,000 and bought himself power. What he didn't know was that I'd spent my whole life learning how to deal with snakes, whether they wore business suits, steel-toed boots, or, now, the face of my own grandson. I didn't call him again. That's what he wanted, me desperate, begging. Instead, I went to the bank in person, sat across from a manager young enough to be my daughter, and I played the part of the confused old man. I nodded when she explained that yes, the money was transferred legally. I asked polite questions. I even smiled. But when I walked out of there, I knew something Ethan didn't. Every transaction leaves a trail, and that trail was leading straight to him. That evening, he showed up at my house like nothing had happened. Bold as brass, he strolled into my kitchen, helped himself to a beer from my fridge, and leaned back against the counter. "Relax, Grandpa," he said, popping the cap off like he owned the place. "It's just money. You'll be fine." I studied him carefully. His smirk, his expensive new sneakers, the watch on his wrist that I knew damn well he couldn't afford last week. I wanted to grab him by the throat, but I stayed quiet, letting him dig his hole. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" I finally asked. He grinned, took a long pull from his beer, and set it down with a clink. "I want you to stop treating me like a kid. You think I don't notice you always calling the shots? Always talking about responsibility? I've got plans, Grandpa. Real plans. And your money's just the start." There it was. The confession. I didn't show him how my hands were trembling under the table, not from fear, but from rage. I leaned forward slowly, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Son, you don't know what you've started." He laughed again, cocky and sure of himself. He thought he was untouchable. But here's the thing about arrogance. It blinds a man. And while he sat there gloating, I was already building my revenge. That night, I opened the old safe in my bedroom. Inside were things Ethan never knew about. Copies of old deeds, receipts, and a little black notebook where I'd written down every loan, every handout, every bailout I'd given that boy since he was 16. Every dollar, every date. It added up to more than 50,000. By dawn, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Ethan had played me for a fool, but now it was my turn. And I don't know if you've ever seen an old man smile in the dark, son, but I can tell you this. There's no smile colder than one born from betrayal. They say rage makes a man loud. I discovered the quieter thing, rage that whispers, plans, waits. I hooked my fingers under the tablecloth and felt the grain of the wood like the pulse of a clock. If Ethan wanted war, I would give him a campaign he'd never forget, a campaign run on patience, paperwork, and the kind of small, surgical embarrassments that cut deeper than fists. Hook first. That night he left, still grinning like a rooster that thinks it owns the yard. I called my lawyer. Not to yell, not to threaten, just to ask one small, precise question. What would you need to prove theft and blackmail? His voice on the other end was flat and businesslike, and suddenly the world that felt personal became a problem with pieces I could move. Evidence, witnesses, paper trails, timestamps. The law likes facts. Facts are boring. Facts are deadly. While I played the broken old man at home, I turned into a different animal outside. I went back through my notebook again. Every bailout, every loan, every time I'd slipped a folded bill into his pocket, just this once. I matched dates with bank statements and receipts. Where I'd been soft, I had now drawn a map. I made copies and slid them into envelopes with neat, cruel handwriting. Ethan Hayes, account of debt. Next I called Mabel Jensen, who runs the corner diner and knows everything about who sleeps where and who spends what. Mabel's the kind of woman who remembers the color of a man's tie the day he asked for a favor. She also remembers when a boy used to sit on her stools and lick his fingers clean after pancakes. I asked her to hold off telling Ethan anything. I'll come by tomorrow, I told her. She knew, in that look she gave me, that I was up to something. I didn't confront him with thunder. I invited him to lunch. Men like him never say no to free beer and the chance to gloat. He arrived with swagger. 3 days later, wallet fat, new phone flashing like a prize fish. He sat down, scanned the room like a king, and ordered the biggest thing on the menu. I told you I'd be fine, he said, as if that settled everything. You worry too much, Grandpa. I poured coffee, slow, deliberate. You've done well for yourself, then? I asked, casual as a man asking the time. He listed off purchases, a sound system, a new girlfriend's ring, a weekend trip. The words came fast, proud, stupidly open. Bragging fills a man up until he bursts. While he talked, I watched his hands. I watched his mouth. I watched for the crack that arrogance always makes. I needed him loose, not prepared. So I let him drink. I let him brag. Men reveal themselves better with alcohol and an audience. Later, when he lit a cigarette and leaned back, satisfied, I did something he didn't expect. I slid a photocopy of the ledger across the table like a placemat. His grin died 2 bites into his sandwich. Is that, he began. Yes, I said. Every dollar. The loans. The deals. The transfers. And the transfer this morning. I tapped the photocopy where the $30,000 withdrawal was marked. You took it. You called it your inheritance. You threatened me. You told me not to go to the bank or the police. His face shifted through colors. Defiance, then panic, then anger. He swore at me, then called me every name he could think of. I let him pace the parking lot outside while I finished my coffee. He came back and sat down again, quieter now. I could see the name of his new watch reflected in the window. You can give it back, I told him. You can apologize. I can make this easy. The voice of the old man, the one with shaking hands and a creaky knee. It was bait. He snorted. Why would I? You're soft. You'll forgive me. That was the mistake. Confidence looks like armor until you realize it's just thin metal. I told him a story I'd rehearsed, about losing everything again if this got ugly. The shame, the bank freezing accounts, a civil suit for restitution, the police report that would not only take money but reputation. I named banks, dates, the manager who'd called me, and the phrase she used, legitimate transfer. I let the law loom like a shadow. Then I did something that scared him properly. I told him I'd already spoken to Michael Park, retired county detective, now a private investigator who owed me a favor from 40 years back. Ethan's jaw tightened. For a moment, I tasted victory. He didn't run. He sat back like a trapped animal, looking for an exit that wasn't there. Why didn't he run? Because some horses are too proud to flee until the gates slam. Look, he said finally, voice thin. I can fix this. I can get you your money. Give me time. No, I said. You don't get time. You get a choice. I slid my phone across the table and hit play. The little speaker crackled and out came his voice. Laughter, bragging about the money, threats to expose me if I went to the bank. He had said so many things to his new friends that my volunteer at the senior center had overheard the night before and passed on. It wasn't perfect evidence for court, but it was a start. It was the sound of a man admitting his crime over cheap beer and cheap praise. He started to stammer. He reached for his phone. I tipped it away with my knuckles. You either hand it back now, in cash, or I file the papers and watch you try to explain every one of these purchases in front of a judge. And if you think that's bad, I added, feeling the old heat at the back of my throat, then you don't know how bad life looks with your name in the paper when you're 22 and your grandfather's savings are gone. He looked as if someone had yanked the floor from beneath him. He pushed his plate away, cursed again, and left so fast he left his half-eaten food steaming on the table. I sat there until the waitress cleaned the crumbs and the sunlight moved across the varnished tabletop like the hands of a clock. That night, I opened my safe and slid one of the photocopies into a stamped envelope. I didn't mail it. Instead, I wrote in a steady hand across the front, Ethan Hayes, restitution. I wrote the time and date of our conversation inside. Then I called my daughter. I told her, in the plainest voice I could muster, that Ethan had taken $30,000 and that I would be filing a police report if the money was not back by noon tomorrow. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I stated facts. She swore and promised she would talk to him. I could hear her voice wobble like a girl who'd been caught between two loyalties. Mothers are a soft line in a child's life, and sometimes they pull the wrong way. I slept badly that night, but sleep or no sleep didn't matter. The trap had sprung. He would either come back to make things right, or he would make other choices and force my next move. Either way, the next morning would change everything. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Ethan's theft was only the first cut. When the police report went in the next day, something else happened. Something in the city I hadn't seen coming. A knock at my door came just after breakfast, not from the police, but from a woman I'd never met who said, "Mr. Conway, I think you need to know who else is involved." She handed me a photograph. And in that photo, someone stood behind Ethan with a hand on his shoulder, smiling, proud, and wearing a ring I recognized. The ring belonged to someone I trusted. The woman who handed me that photograph didn't stay long. She didn't even give her name. Just a brief knock, a folded envelope, and then she was gone, slipping down the street before I could get another word out. I sat at my kitchen table, the envelope heavy in my hands. I opened it slow, the way a man might peel back a bandage on a wound he's afraid to see. Inside was a single photograph, glossy, sharp. Ethan stood there, leaning against a car I didn't recognize. His grin was wide, but it wasn't his smile that froze me. It was the hand on his shoulder. A hand with a thick silver ring. I knew that ring. I'd seen it for years across Sunday dinners, poker nights, backyard barbecues. It belonged to Tom Halpern, my neighbor of 20 years. A man I'd trusted to feed my dog when I traveled. A man who'd borrowed tools from my shed and always returned them late, but returned them. A man I had once called friend. The betrayal doubled me over harder than Ethan's theft. I could almost hear Margaret's voice. "Tom's a snake. Can't you see?" But I'd never listened. Now the proof lay right in front of me. I stared at the photo until the daylight changed, until the shadows of the blinds cut stripes across Ethan's face. And then I whispered to myself, it wasn't just him. He had help. That night, I didn't eat. I sat in the dark, thinking back over every conversation with Tom. The time he asked about my accounts, said he was curious how retirees managed their savings. The time he'd cornered Ethan in the driveway, talking low and quick. The time he'd joked that I was sitting on a gold mine. The signs were all there. I'd ignored every one. The next morning, I made my move. I didn't call Tom. I didn't confront him across the fence. No, that would be too easy, too expected. Instead, I went back to the bank, this time not to ask questions but to request documents. Transfers, logs, signatures. I kept my voice polite, the way old men are expected to. They don't see you coming when you wear flannel and walk slow. By noon, I had what I needed. Ethan's account had swelled fast, too fast for a kid who never worked a steady job. And there it was, large cash withdrawals, then deposits into another account. The name on that second account? Thomas Halpern, my neighbor, my friend, the man who'd stood at my wife's funeral with tears in his eyes. I sat in my truck outside the bank, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The betrayal was so deep I thought my chest might split. But right there, under the weight of that rage, a cold clarity came to me. This wasn't just theft. It was conspiracy. They thought I was weak. They thought age had dulled me. They thought I'd accept the loss and shuffle along. But they had underestimated me. That night, I played my part. I sat on my porch with the light on, rocking slowly in my chair, nodding when Tom waved across the street. He smiled like always, smug, sure that his secret was safe. He didn't know that I had his account number in my pocket, or that my lawyer was already preparing papers that would drag his name through every court in the county. And Ethan, my grandson, he didn't know that his betrayal had just tied him to a sinking ship. I didn't sleep. I wrote instead. I drafted a letter to Ethan, another to Tom. Short, clear, no wasted words. You stole from me. I know everything. You have until Friday to make this right. After that, I won't be the one begging. You will. I sealed the envelopes, set them on the counter, and leaned back in my chair. Revenge wasn't coming. It was already here. But what they didn't know yet was how far I was willing to go. I'll tell you something about revenge, kid. It's not a spectacle. It's a set of small, precise moves that look ordinary until they don't. The night I decided to confront them both, I dressed like an ordinary man, flannel, old work boots, and kept my face a blank I'd practiced in the mirror for days. I wanted them to see the same grandfather they'd taken for granted. I wanted them to lower their guard. Then I let the trap close. I arranged it like a simple thing. I called Tom and asked if he could stop by the garage that afternoon, said I needed help with a leak. I called Ethan and told him there was a delivery at my house, something he wanted to see, and to come pick it up. Both answered eager, both with the same careless tone that belongs to people who think the world still owes them favors. They arrived within 20 minutes of each other. Tom's truck rolled in first, same silver ring glinting on his hand, diesel smell in the cab. He ambled toward me like a man who'd been invited to a barbecue. Ethan showed up moments later, hood up, phone already in his hand, sneakers crunching gravel with a nervous swagger. He spotted Tom and froze for a heartbeat, the only thing that made him look young again. Afternoon, Tom said, too loud, like he wanted me and the whole neighborhood to know he was not afraid of me. You picked a poor time to be brazen, I said, folding my arms across my chest. The garage smelled of oil and old rags. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. They both paused, a hair of uncertainty cutting through their bravado. I slid the photocopies across the workbench, the ledger, the withdrawal logs, the bank printouts. Tom's face tightened as he recognized his name. Ethan's jaw went slack. For a few heartbeats, neither of them spoke. Then Tom leaned in, fingers tapping the paper like he was deciding if the ink was real. You got a lot of nerve, old man, he said finally. You gonna press charges over a little loan? He paid me back. Ethan barked a laugh that sounded too small. What are you talking about? He brought it here. I put it in his account. Save it, I said. The bank's records don't lie. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers. Your signature shows up on Thomas Halpern's account paperwork a week after the cash came in. You think we can keep pretending this is a misunderstanding? You think I don't know who bought the watch on June 3rd? Tom's face went red, then pale. That watch, he began. Bought with your cash, I finished. With my cash. Ethan's eyes darted to Tom. I told you he'd play it safe, he snarled, acting like the hurt went all ways. Anger passed between them like a handoff. Tom shoved the ledger toward Ethan. You put me up to this, didn't you? You told me he had cash. You said it was wired. You said. Shut up, Ethan snapped. He looked suddenly younger, wild around the edges. You think I'm the one who needed it? You think I'm the only one who had plans? I did my part. They argued. Loud, messy words flung like tools. In the middle of it, I felt oddly calm. I'd brought everything they needed to ruin each other. All I had to do was watch. Then I reached into my pocket and set my phone on the bench between them. I tapped the screen. A voice crackled through the little speaker. It was Ethan, recorded, slurring a laugh into a cheap mic, boasting to friends about how easy it was to empty an old man's account. I got the tape from the kid at the senior center who loved to eavesdrop while he drank coffee. The recording wasn't courtroom perfect, but it was damning when paired with the other papers. They both fell silent. Tom's mouth started to move, as if to explain, to rewrite history. That's when I let myself be colder than I'd ever been in my life. Either you both go to the bank with me right now, and we get this settled before the police write their report, I said, voice low and controlled. Or I walk into the sheriff's office with everything in these folders and sit there until they take statements. You'll both give your versions under oath, and then we'll see how many friends you have left when it's in the files. Tom's hand quivered. Ethan's bravado cracked like glass. You'd ruin your kid for that? Tom asked suddenly, looking at me as if I'd forgotten what family was supposed to mean. I could see the thought. Protect yourself by blaming the boy, trying to solve his cowardice. Ethan's laugh had nothing in it. Don't you dare. Words spilled. Accusations. Confessions disguised as blame. Tom started to babble about gambling debts, about men who'd lent him money with menacing smiles, names he refused to say. Ethan countered, saying he'd only meant to teach me a lesson, that he never thought I'd go to the cops, that it would be easier to play the part of the prodigal grandson and walk away with a clean pocket, and he stopped, looked at me like he'd killed something. You little fool, I said, voice brittle. You signed those checks. You saw the transfers. You used my trust. Ethan's face crumpled, and in that moment, something happened that I hadn't planned for. He began to cry. Real, ragged sobs from a boy who'd spent his life being handed things and never taught how to carry them. Tom shrugged like a man who'd been waiting his turn. Look, he said finally. I took it because he promised me he'd pay me back with interest. I put it in my account to cover the interest, and his voice stopped. He couldn't even finish that sentence. You put it where? I asked, slow as a judge delivering a sentence. Into an offshore thing. I thought I could launder it quick. I didn't think you'd catch on. He looked at Ethan like he wanted to bite him. He promised me a piece. He promised I'd double it. The garage felt suddenly too small. The money had moved like a liquid through their fingers, mine into their hands, then into someone else's pockets. I should have felt relief. Instead, the betrayal layered on betrayal felt like a sickness. I told them both, calm, measured, the only path left. You go to the bank. You reverse the transfers. You pay it back in full. You both sign a written confession I keep. You accept whatever charges come, and I see that restitution is arranged. Or I go to the sheriff with everything I have. Ethan's face was streaked with tears, but there was something in his eyes now I hadn't seen before. Fear for himself and a dawning hatred of the man who had put him here, Tom. Tom's shoulders drooped. He swallowed hard and said, I can't reverse the offshore. I wired it out. It's gone. The bank can trace it, I said. It takes time. But time is the thing you both don't have. For a long minute, they just stared at me. Then Tom, as if he'd decided to save himself by burning a bridge, spat out a name that made the air in my lungs stop. Her, he said. She handled it after me. Avery Malone. She set up the transfers. Said she'd make it look like nothing. Said she'd split it with us for a fee. She wears a ring like yours, Grandpa. No, not like yours. Different. Avery Malone. The name dropped like a new stone on a pond I thought I had skimmed clean. I knew that name. I could picture the woman. Tall, hair like a storm cloud. Once a member of the garden club until she'd left town amid rumors. She'd been the one I'd trusted to organize the block's holiday bake sale. The last person I'd suspected. Ethan shouted. No, Avery. She's crazy. She said she'd handle it. She said, but he trailed off. Tom looked suddenly ashamed, like a man who'd been tricked into handing his wallet to a prettier thief. My head felt light and heavy at once, the way it does before a storm. The trap had worked. They'd turned on each other. I had what I needed to pull more threads. But they'd also given me something new to chew on, a woman with a history, a connection, a ring that matched a photograph I'd seen in the envelope from the stranger. Someone in my circle who'd been smiling at me at Thanksgiving. Someone who now had a stake in my ruin. I closed my eyes for a second and tasted copper. Then I opened them and looked at them both. Tom, who'd pawned my trust for short-term gain, and Ethan, who'd traded his soul for quick cash. And I felt a warmth coil through me that was equal parts fury and hunger. All right, I said. We go to the bank. We begin cleaning up this mess. After that, you both come to my house. You tell me everything you know about Avery Malone. You will not leave until you have. I stood, felt my knees creak, and reached into my pocket for my keys. They followed me out in a line that looked, for a moment, like repentance, or like fear. Either way, it was progress. We drove to the bank under a sky the color of old pewter. I walked in with two guilty men at my heels and a wallet of paper that would choke any judge into action. The manager who'd been polite the first time looked pale when she saw Tom's face. Paperwork was filled out. Phones were taken. I signed what I had to sign. The bank placed temporary holds. It was slow work, painstaking and procedural, but it built a wall between their freedom and our truth. When we walked out, the sun was a dull coin behind clouds. I set my jaw and told them both, "Tonight, you come to my house. We talk about Avery Malone." They nodded, silent. But when I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, I saw the shadow first. A dark car parked 2 houses down, engine still warm. There was a movement behind the windshield like someone watching. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself I'd been through worse. But a part of me, old and wise in the ways of being watched, knew better. The money had fingers that reached farther than my garage. The ring in that photograph was not just jewelry. It was a signal. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone was waiting. I opened my front door and switched on the porch light. The house felt different under that light, like a stage. I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Behind me, the hall clock ticked like a metronome. The house settled into the routine I'd tried to maintain for years. I poured coffee for 3 and set the mugs on the table. Tom sat across from me, his bulk filling the old chair. Ethan sat to his right, sullen and small. They kept their heads down as if ashamed. I poured and listened for sounds outside. Footsteps, car doors, the shuffle of someone leaving. At 9:07, the doorbell rang. Tom looked at me with something like panic. Ethan lifted his head, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a spark of something I could almost call courage. "Don't answer it," Tom whispered. "Answer it," I said. I already knew someone would come. I left the back light on when I drove past the street. I wanted to see who had the nerve. Ethan swallowed. "What if it's her? Then we see how brave she is," I said. I stood slowly, opened the door, and felt an odd tremor run across my skin. On the porch stood a woman taller than I remembered, wearing a coat that swallowed her. Her hair was silver at the temples. Her eyes were dark and bright, as if they liked secrets. In her hand, she held a little velvet box. "Avery Malone," she said, smiling like she'd come for coffee and a gossip column. "Lovely to see you again, Mr. Conway." I told myself I wouldn't be surprised. I told myself I was ready. But the sight of her on my porch, the ring glinting on her finger as she shifted the box, and the way she looked at Tom and then at Ethan like a conductor surveying her orchestra, well, it settled my stomach in a way I hadn't expected. "You're the reason I lost my savings," I said, straight to the point. She tilted her head. "No, dear. I'm the reason people learn the cost of underestimating a woman." Her eyes flicked to the little velvet box. "Shall we talk inside? I have a proposition." I felt the air leave the room. Tom's chair scraped. Ethan's breath hitched. The kettle hissed on the stove. There are moments a man remembers with the clarity of bone. When she stepped past the threshold, I felt like someone had turned the key on a lock I didn't know existed. She closed the door behind her, and in the sudden hush, her hand, ringed, steady, opened the little velvet box. Inside, a single key lay on a cushion of black velvet. Not a jewelry key. A little brass key, old and unremarkable, but it was mine. I recognized the pattern, the spare to my own garden shed. I hadn't seen that key since the day I fixed the fence last month. Avery smiled. "You keep everything locked away, Mr. Conway. You should be more careful." I felt something in my chest break open like ice. "You stole my key?" I said. She laughed. "Oh, darling. I borrow what I need." Outside, the shadow car rolled its lights and eased away. Inside, with the kettle forgotten and 3 cups of coffee growing cold, I realized I'd stepped into something far bigger than a family squabble. The ledger and the bank prints were only the first layer. The ring, the photograph, the stolen key, all of it pointed to a network that had been moving in my streets for longer than I'd seen. Avery closed the box, tucked the key into her palm, and placed it on the table between us as if to say, "You have your evidence, and I have my deterrence." "Now," she said, voice like velvet over steel, "tell me why you dragged 2 of my boys to your kitchen." I could taste the copper on my tongue. My hands were steady only because I decided they would be. I'd come this far. I could see my next moves like chess. But before I could answer, there was a sound from the hallway that made my blood run cold. The soft thud of boots on the back steps, quick and purposeful. Someone was coming in the back door. All of us turned toward the sound. Avery's smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. Tom started to reach for his phone. Ethan slid down in his chair like a child caught doing something forbidden. The back door clicked, and the face that stepped through was one I had loved and trusted for decades, except older, eyes glassy, a smile that didn't reach the corners. She looked at me, then at Avery, and then at the little brass key on the table, and whispered a single name. "Grandpa," she said, "you don't know what you're about to open." The spoon in my cup trembled, and then the lights went out. When the lights died, the house went silent except for the ticking of the hall clock. My heart pounded so hard it filled my ears. I knew every creak of that house, every shiver in the wood, and I could tell the darkness wasn't empty. I didn't move at first. Old men don't need speed, we need patience. I sat there, hands flat on the table, listening. Then a match struck. A tiny flame lit Avery's face, sharp and calm. As she lit a candle she must have brought herself. The glow flickered across Tom's pale face and Ethan's wide, wet eyes. Behind them stood my daughter. Yes, my daughter, the one I thought I knew, staring at me with something I couldn't read. "Dad," she whispered, "you shouldn't have pulled this thread." Her voice cut deeper than anything Ethan had done. For a moment I couldn't breathe. She stepped forward, the brass key still glinting where Avery had placed it. "You're with her?" I asked, my voice rough, almost breaking. "I'm with myself," she said, steady now. "All those years you controlled the money, the house, the choices. You thought helping was love, but it was power. I finally took some back. Ethan just rushed things." The words hit me harder than the theft. Betrayal layered on betrayal. First my grandson, then my neighbor, and now my own daughter standing in my kitchen like a stranger. Avery leaned forward, her candlelight smile soft as silk. "This isn't about 30,000, Mr. Conway. It's about ending your reign. You built cages out of kindness. We're simply breaking the locks." I looked at Ethan. Tears streaked his cheeks, but there was a hardness behind them now, a boy trying to stand in a man's shadow. "Grandpa," he said, voice low, "maybe they're right." That was the last straw. My hand stopped trembling. I leaned across the table and said, plain as stone, "You think you've broken me? You've mistaken kindness for weakness. Every scrap of evidence, every recording, every transfer, I've already copied and sent them to a man who owes me more than you can imagine. If I don't make it through tonight, the sheriff will have it all by morning." The words hit them like a hammer. Tom cursed. Ethan's face drained of color. My daughter's lips parted, but no sound came. And Avery's smile finally faltered. "Checkmate," I whispered. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then Avery snapped the little box shut, tucked the key into her coat, and stood. "You've bought yourself time, old man. But time runs out." She nodded to my daughter, then to Ethan, and walked out the door without another word. One by one, the others followed, Tom muttering, Ethan avoiding my eyes, my daughter looking back once, her face unreadable in the candlelight. Then the door closed, and I was alone with the clock ticking and the coffee gone cold. I sat there until dawn, the first light slipping through the curtains. My house smelled of wax and fear. They thought they'd left me broken. But what they didn't understand is this. Revenge isn't a moment. It's a season. The sheriff will get his papers. The bank will chase its trails. The law will move slow, but steady. And me? I'll be waiting. Not out of hatred. Out of duty. A man spends his life building something. Family. Home. Trust. When it's taken, you don't just sit down. You rise. And when the people who betrayed you finally fall, and they will fall, they'll see the face of the man they thought was too old to fight back. My face. Grandpa.